Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast. I'm Marie, your host for today, and we will be discussing a path to parenthood that, while unorthodox, has become increasingly common. With the joy of building a family through this method comes a unique set of ethical considerations that must be explored. So joining us today is Wendy Kramer, co-founder and director of the Donor Sibling Registry, a vital resource of donor-conceived individuals and their families. Her work aims to assist individuals conceived as a result of sperm, egg, or embryo donation who are seeking to make mutually desired contact with others with whom they share genetic ties. With over 93,000 members in 105 countries, the registry has helped connect more than 26,000 of them with their half-siblings and or biological parents. Wendy has listened to, advised, and researched thousands of these parents, donors, donor-conceived people, and other donor family members. So we are stoked to be learning more from her today. Hi, Wendy. How are you going?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
That's great to hear. I'm going well too. So before we begin, I'd love to hear more about your work at the Donor Sibling Registry. The first thing I want to ask is, how did it come about? When did you start it?
Okay, so the beginning of the story is that I was married and my husband at the time had some infertility issues. So in late 1989, we used a donor. That was the only way that we could have a child. And so my son Ryan was born in 1990. And a year later, my ex-husband and I split up. So I began to raise Ryan as an only parent. And he was a very inquisitive child and noticed in preschool that a lot of kids had moms and dads. And he came home from preschool one day. He was 2.5 years old. And he said, "So did my dad die or what?" Because my ex had been completely out of the picture. So it was at that moment that I said, "Oh my goodness, I guess we're having the conversation." And I told him it was a very short 2-year-old conversation, but you needed an egg from a mommy and a sperm from a daddy. And I didn't have the sperm. And I went to a nice doctor, and pretty much it was about a 30-second conversation. And then he asked me a follow-up question about choo-choo trains or something like that. And that was that. But it was a really important conversation because it was the cornerstone conversation. It was on that conversation that all future discussions and his understanding of how he came to be kind of unfolded. So fast forward a few years later, and he's a very, again, inquisitive child. By the time he's 6 years old, he's looking at me saying, "I want to know who my biological father is." And at that point, I'm thinking, "Oh my God, what have I done? What do I do?" There were no answers for me to give him. So we basically at that point had to wait until social media was invented. And so in the year 2000, when Ryan was 10, we started a Yahoo group thinking, well, if my kid is curious, maybe there are other donor-conceived people who are curious. Maybe donors are curious. Maybe parents want to know. Maybe they have medical information to share. I had no idea. So Ryan and I together built a Yahoo group. And that was the beginning of the Donor Sibling Registry, a place for people to connect and find each other. And it was all mutual consent context. So nobody was outing anybody. And what we quickly began to realize is that up until that point, donor-conceived people didn't know that they had the right to be curious, that they had the right to search for, and that they had the right to find and then define those donor family relatives. And so it was slow going at first. And then about a couple of years after we started getting media attention, national media attention, worldwide media attention. And it seems like every time we were on a TV show or newspaper or whatever, boom, 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 we just grew by leaps and bounds. And we started connecting people, donors to kids, half siblings to each other, parents of young children, the half siblings would connect, and we were kind of off and running. And then as we built the Donor Sibling Registry, we began to realize that there was also a need, besides the connecting, there was a need for support. These families needed support. They were not getting it from the reproductive medicine industry. And there was also a need to educate people. Parents and donors were not properly educated beforehand about what they were about to do. So that became kind of our mission, was to connect, educate, and support everyone in the donor family.
That's amazing. And you guys have grown so much over the years as well. So from your experience, what have been the primary challenges and successes that the registry has encountered when facilitating connections between donor-conceived people?
Yeah, so I would say the major challenge is the reproductive medicine industry. What we all came to realize very early on is that much of the information that we were given by the sperm banks or egg clinics was false. Basically, if you go on any facility's website, it's marketing materials. It really has little to do with actuality. For example, most of us were told, let's say in my son's half-sibling group, which is now, as of last week, 31, most of us moms and the donor himself, we were promised that there'd be no more than 10 kids. And still, they make these promises about limits. They'll limit the number of kids. And even in countries like Australia, where they have local laws with limits, the problem is they're all buying the sperm from the US and Denmark. So limits are never kept to. And so what we found is that there's not a lot of ethics and responsibility and honesty in this industry that's actually creating human beings. For example, and the difference is, if you look at artificial insemination in the cattle industry, cows, it's mandated that accurate records are keeping on the children, on the cows being born. And every single cow born from artificial insemination, there's a record of that cow. But when it comes to human beings, there's no regulation, no oversight, no government body overseeing this. And so there are no accurate records on the number of children born to any one donor. So therefore, all the limits that they claim and have claimed, for 30, 40 years, they're all really deceptive or basically lies. So the hardest part, or the biggest challenge, I'd say, is we're trying to help the families that have, yes, we all have our children, and that's wonderful. But we're still operating out of an industry that's extremely unethical and irresponsible. So trying to take that kind of methodology, the way that the whole industry is set up, and then help the people with connecting, supporting, and educating them it just becomes really challenging. We don't have the industry on our side. They see us as a threat because for years they would tell these lies to people about, for example, in addition to we limit the number of kids born for any one donor, we do regular medical updates with our donors. We share medical information amongst families. So these things they claim to do, but they really don't do. And then when we came along and we started actually connecting people who were born from the same donor or parents who had kids born from the same donor or the donors, we all came to realize that for decades, this industry had been keeping all these deceitful lies kind of swept under the carpet. And when we came along, we kind of lifted the rug on those lies. And we said, oh, hold up here. They are not keeping track. They're not limiting the number of kids. They're not doing regular medical updates. They're not sharing urgent medical information amongst families because they don't even know who the families are. So I would say that's the biggest challenge, is just dealing with an industry that is run like the Wild West with no accountability, no responsibility, no ethics, and no oversight or regulation. So nobody's watching. And then people around the world are at the effect of that, because now in places like Australia that have the local laws, everyone's buying the US and Danish sperm anyway, which, has no rules and regulations. So the whole thing is really a mess that we're trying to make sense of.
Yeah.
So that's the challenges. So the success is, that we've connected more than 23,000 people? Yeah. And that's half sibling to half sibling, donor to offspring. And we have amazing stories. We're all really redefining family. I never thought that my son would have 30 half brothers and sisters. And so we're learning personally as well as, professionally. That's my life's work on the Donor Sibling Registry. We're kind of learning how to expand our idea of family and what does it mean? And what if you're strangers yet you're closely related? Like, how do we all kind of look at how we define family, reassess that, and then expand upon it to include people that we never would have imagined we would include?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating. It sounds like it's incredibly complex from all angles, really. And I would love to know more about what you've shared with us. But before we go further into detail, I'd love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Wendy? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, I live in Colorado. And I live in the Rocky Mountains, so way up in a tiny mountain town. I think we have 1,200 people, so not even a traffic light, very tiny town. And the great thing about living up here is that I can walk to the hiking trails. So myself and my dog, who's right behind me, we, every day, weather permitting, we go hiking. And that's kind of kind of relieves the stress, and I'm outdoors, and it centers my brain and rejuvenates me. So I'm just really, really lucky that I can walk out my door and within 5 minutes have access to a plethora of hiking trails.
Yeah, that's amazing. Hiking every day is a huge commitment. How long do you spend hiking?
Let's see. So I go from the shortest would be 45 minutes. And then during a work day, the longest is 2 to 3 hours. And then on the weekend, it can be an all day thing. Because I go really up into the high country to the big mountains, which is an all day, half the day up and then half the day down.
Yeah, but huge reward as well. It's really rewarding to be able to get up there. But are there any days at all where you don't feel like going hiking?
Um, no, not really, because
Wow.
the benefits are so rewarding to me, right? Like just being out in nature and moving my body. And I don't know, like I just love it, you know?
Yeah.
But that said, because I live so high, you know, the altitude is so high here, there are a lot of days that are too cold or too snowy or hailing, sleeting, raining, you know, that kind of thing. So I used to go out in anything, you know, you just gear up and you go. And now every year I get a little bit more picky, you know.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I feel like I'd be really picky too, but that's also because I don't live near any hiking trails. So that's probably why. But on the days that you aren't able to hike, what do you like to do to wind down?
Well, I work from home, you know, so usually my wind down is, you know, watching a movie or TV or, you know, doing stuff around the house.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really nice to know. My next question for you is who do you look up to?
That's a hard one to pick a specific person. I kind of emulate people who have created something out of nothing, who had an idea that hadn't been done before, and they did everything in their power to bring that idea to fruition. So it's one thing to kind of build on something, or there's something already out there and you make something different or the same or something. But to me, it's really unique when people make something out of nothing. Um, it takes, I think, a certain amount of ingenuity. And I'm fascinated when I hear about people who have done that and
Yeah,
how
like
they did it and
yeah.
what happened when they hit their challenges, you know,
Mhm.
being that there was no roadmap and they were actually making the roadmap as they went along. That's really fascinating for me to hear about how people did that and how they didn't get stopped along the way and give up.
Yeah, for sure. Because it doesn't just take a good idea; it takes hard work and perseverance and really just enduring intelligence. I suppose to be able to make that work. And well, you could say that you have done something similar as well, actually. So do you perhaps look up to yourself?
Maybe that's why it interests me. I don't
Yeah.
know. Because, well, I don't know that I've been as graceful as others that I look up to because creating the Donor Sibling Registry has been, you know, there have been challenges along the way. And some of them I didn't know that I would get over, you know, rebuilding our website, like literally brought me to my knees because I am not
Yeah.
qualified to do that. And, you know, finding the developers and having a project that almost failed. And it was extremely stressful. And I always think, like, wow, if I was one of those people I look up to, I probably would have handled it more gracefully
Yeah.
and known that it was going to work out no matter what.
Yeah.
Instead of being fearful that, like, oh my God, my life's work is about to go down the drain and I can't do this, you know? And thank God for my son, who is like the wind beneath my wings, because he just hung in there with me um, and just pushed me, just like, we're going to get through this, we're going to get it done. And through every kind of challenge, we're a team, you know, and he at times is more level headed and he's way smarter than I am. So he can maybe pull back and see the big picture a little bit better than I can.
Oh, that's really sweet the way you speak about your son. And you know what? I reckon that, look, I'm pretty similar to you as well. I do panic when um, what I perceive to be an issue is like uh, potentially unresolvable I do panic a lot, and I do need a level-headed person to calm me down. So I do relate to that. But I reckon that we don't know the full length, the full extent to these stories that we look up to. I reckon that at some point they have panicked and we just don't know about it. So
Right. So
yeah,
maybe when they tell their story, they tell it in a way that makes it look like everything was easy and they handled it with grace. But you're right. Maybe if we were actually, a fly on the wall and watch some of it, maybe they would have meltdowns just like me,
Yeah, potentially. You're only human. But yeah, I just wanted to circle back to your son as well, and your definition of family. What do you think family is? You do have a very unique perspective on it. So yeah, do share.
Well, I think family, obviously, it's different for everybody. And it is, DNA doesn't make a family, but it is one way to make a family. It's not the only way to make a family, but it is certainly one way. I think we all define family in a very different way. For some people, it's only the people that I'm genetically related to. For other people, it's definitely not the family I'm genetically related to because I've made my own family, So, and I think everybody gets to define that for themselves. What I've seen with my work in the Donor Sibling Registry is that sometimes parents have this kind of a defined idea of family that they haven't changed for a while. And when they have a donor-conceived child, the relatives that the child may have through donor insemination, half-siblings, biological parents, that is not included in their definition of family at the onset, right? Like, I'm just using a donor. It's just a donated cell. It's a piece of genetic material, but those people are not my children's relatives and never will be. And so I think for parents who start out that way, there's a journey that needs to happen and opening up, because otherwise it's, in my opinion, not fair to the child to kind of reassess your idea of family. Because for the parents, while you may not view your child's donor family relatives as family, your child might. And I think for some parents, that's really hard, especially when their kids are little. And they tend to think that whatever I think my child is going to think too. And, I hate to tell them, like, as soon as your kid's a teenager, they're going to think they're going to think for themselves. And your idea of family, they might have a completely different idea of what family is. And their family and their curiosity might lend itself towards their biological relatives, the donor's family, half-siblings. And so I think for parents, it's really, really important to constantly reassess your idea of family. And if you've used a donor or you're going to use a donor, if you're going to serve your child in the way that he or her deserves to be served and raised, you have to acknowledge that your idea of family may not be the same as your child, and you need to give your child the opportunity to figure it out for themselves. So what that means in the realm of donor conception is we don't keep our children, we don't keep any human beings from their cousins or their aunts or uncles or grandparents until they're 18 years old. So why would we keep donor-conceived people from their close genetic relatives, half-siblings, donors, they're very close genetic relatives? Why would we keep them from their family, their biological family, for 18 years? It doesn't make any sense. Like, in no time in history, anywhere in the planet, has it been deemed in a child's best interest to keep them from their genetic relatives until they're an adult. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Yet this is the idea that the donor conception industry has sold all of us parents and the donors, that it's somehow in a child's best interest to keep them from their genetic relatives. And I hear sometimes parents say, well, I'm not going to let my child connect with their donor relatives until they choose or until they're 18. And it baffles me. Like, why would you keep your child from their close relatives? And the answer is there's some fear there, or they're feeling threatened in some way, which properly counseling and educating donors beforehand would alleviate that, right? So that then the path would be clear to explore those relationships. Like, there's no, just because you're biologically related to somebody doesn't guarantee a relationship, but you should be able to explore, like, okay, my son has 30 half siblings. He should be able to, and he should have been able to when he was a young child. He shouldn't have had to wait until he was in his 20s and 30s, right? To explore those relationships and get to know those people and have them maybe as a support system, or maybe, just at the very least to share and update medical information with. So I think it's really, really important for parents and for the donors. Like, a donor thinks, oh, I just gave, my genetic material. Those kids are not my kids. Not like the kids I'm raising, but to the donor conceived people, it doesn't matter. Like, your biological parent is your biological parent. Not all donor conceived people, but I would say for the great majority, they're curious. They want to know. It's an innate human desire to want to know who we come from. Yeah. And then donor conceived people should have the right to determine, do I look at those people as family or not? And if I do, then, I want my family that raised me and loved me, I want them to acknowledge that connection in that way too. They may not feel those people are family, but they need to acknowledge that I do.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good note to leave the Have You Met section on and go right into the interview, where we will establish some of the basics of donor conception as well. And the first thing that I would like to know is, how does the process of donor conception work? What are the different types of donor arrangements available?
Well, so if you go to a facility, a sperm bank, a clinic, an egg clinic, or an egg agency, the donors there have no legal rights or responsibilities, as opposed to donors maybe you find on Facebook or something. And that's kind of out of my realm. So the group that I'm dealing with are people that used a doctor, a clinic, a sperm bank, an agency, to buy the sperm, egg, or embryos, basically. And for many years now, they've sold donors either as anonymous or what they call open, or willing to be known. And that's kind of another one of those deceitful things, right? It's all anonymous. Every egg and sperm is and always has been sold as anonymous. It's either anonymous for 18 years or anonymous forever. And what we know is that, first of all, anonymity ended 19 years ago when the first donor-conceived child found their biological father, the sperm donor, through a DNA test. We knew 19 years ago, this was in 2005, that anonymity was over and nobody should be promising not 18 years of anonymity, not anonymity forever. Because we knew when that child found their donor through a commercial DNA test, and that was long before 23andMe and Ancestry, we knew that was a game changer. It was over. That child happened to be my child. And we knew at that point that if Ryan could find his donor through a DNA test, anybody could do it. And we waved our arms like crazy to the industry saying, hey, stop promising anonymity. It is not possible anymore. And, now, of course, everybody acknowledges it, but still, every single sperm and egg are sold as anonymous for 18 years or forever. So to me, that's really deceptive. I know that parents and donors are not adequately counseled and educated about that. I've had donors and parents come to me and say, well, donors have said, as long as I don't put my DNA into the commercial DNA sites, no one will find me, which is completely false. You don't have to swab your cheek to be found. My son's biological father never swabbed his cheek and he was found. And again, that was 19 years ago. So, but every clinic now still sells all the sperm and all the eggs as 18 years anonymous or anonymous forever. And I would say they're moving more towards not selling it as anonymous forever. But I know all the US sperm banks and the Danish sperm banks, every vial of sperm they sell is anonymous for 18 years, even, to countries that have banned anonymity. All those countries now import the sperm from the US and the Danish sperm banks, and they're all anonymous. So that's the way they're sold as far as open and anonymous. And basically the way that it works is, for sperm donation, for the most part, you don't need IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, and that's fertilization outside of the body, which is used for egg donation. With sperm donation, it's like, think turkey baster, simple, a medical turkey baster of sorts. It's the same kind of idea as other families. It's just done with a different device,
Right. Yeah.
But people buy, donors sell their sperm and they sell their eggs. And then parents buy that sperm or buy the eggs. So it's sperm sellers and sperm vendors and sperm purchasers. That's who we all really are.
And in your opinion, what rights should the donor-conceived individuals have in terms of accessing these information about their genetic origins?
I think for decades, it's been about the rights of the industry, the clinics, the sperm banks, the rights to sell gametes. I think it's been about the rights of the parents to have a child. I think it's been about the rights of donors to sell their eggs or sperm. And nowhere in the policies or the methodologies of the whole industry have the rights of the donor-conceived people been included in the conversation. And we've been saying for, more than 2 decades now, they not only need to be included in the conversation, but I think they need to be heard first and foremost. We're creating human beings, so we need to understand what are their needs and what are their rights as human beings. And we know enough now. I mean, we've conducted and published many research studies. So the information is there, the data is there about what is important to donor-conceived people, knowing who and where they come from and knowing about their ancestry, knowing about their family medical history, and knowing their close genetic relatives. We know that these things matter to them. And, the word rights is a funny word because who determines someone's right? So, but I think we have to look at what are their needs and then determine, are their needs being met? And then we can see what needs to be fixed within this industry so that we don't continue to create these human beings who are deliberately cut off from their their biological family, their ancestry, their family medical history. And we know these things are really important.
And based on what you've researched so far, do you have a hypothesis of what their needs could be?
Well, yeah. I mean, they want to have access. They want to be able to grow up knowing their relatives, just like I assume you and me and most other people. There is no reason to keep them from their genetic relatives. And this is an industry that is just based on that fact, creating human beings who are deliberately kept from their relatives, their ancestry, their medical history, and updated medical information. And I think those are like the three core things that we need to look at, like, and ask ourselves, is this an equitable situation? Are the needs and the rights of human beings being acknowledged and addressed in the realm of donor conception? And I don't feel that they are. And if your next question is, why aren't they? I can answer that. Whenever you look at this industry and say, well, why is it like this? And how come they don't do this? Or why did they do this? The answer is always the same. And it's one word: money. Because the way that this industry, this for-profit industry is run is to money comes first. So if they limited the number of kids for any one donor, they would sell less sperm. That would be less money. If they had accurate record keeping so that they knew how many kids would be created for any donor, which would come first, that would cost money. Having accurate records costs money. If they updated medical records, that would cost money. So everything that they need to do to be more ethical and responsible, it would take more money. And the industry is not willing, up until this point, to spend the extra money to become more ethically and responsibly run.
That is so disheartening to me, because they're dealing with legitimate human beings here, and they're not even willing to be ethical, and they are masquerading as companies that help people, yet they're not willing to be actually ethical about it, which is just quite predictable for our world, to be honest, but nevertheless still disheartening. But now, to move on to open conversations and discussions with donor conceived children, in your experience, what are some of the potential psychological impacts on donor conceived children when learning about their genetic origins, or potentially not, the lack of learning about their genetic origins?
Right. So what we know and what we have learned, I told my son Ryan when he was 2, right? And that really was ideal. And what we know from research is that the donor conceived people that fare the best are the ones who can't remember being told. So there wasn't like this telling event. It's just something they've always known. People ask my son, just give him, what we do. People have asked my son frequently, or they used to, what was it like when you found out you were donor conceived? And he's like, I don't know. What was it like when you found out you had blonde hair? Like, it's just like a part of who I am and who I always was, right? So there's no emotion, there's no stigma. He would say, my name is Ryan Kramer, and I ride mountain bikes, and I live in Netherlands, and I'm a donor baby, and I have blonde hair. Like, it was just a part of who he was, It was incorporated into his identity at such a young age that it was benign. It just really, it didn't matter, right? Where we see the problem is the older people wait to tell their children because they think children have to understand it fully before they're told, which is ridiculous. Every year that they wait, it can become more and more problematic. I talk to many donor conceived people who are adults who are just finding out. I talk to many parents who have teenagers who they haven't told yet, and they're scared to death. I talk to parents of basically kids of all ages, and I talk to donor conceived people all the way up to in their 70s who just found out. And when you are older and you find out or are told, many are finding out through DNA testing, they're shocked, and many of them feel a sense of betrayal towards their parents who lied to them about this something so core to their identity. So what we've learned is disclosure is not optional. It used to be optional, and people would say, well, it's different for all families. No, it's not optional unless there is a severe medical issue, a mental or physical medical issue. So I would say 99.9% of the time, disclosure is not optional. And what we know is that telling a child when they're pre-verbal is best. So even younger than my child, it should be, this is why I wrote a kids book and it's really a kids book, but it is a book for parents so that they know how to open the conversation, right? So it can be read to kids, when they're babies or toddlers. They're never too young to be hearing their story. So again, just like Ryan, it becomes a part of their identity, and it's not something to be ashamed of. Secrecy implies shame, and we don't want our kids to be ashamed of any part of them, especially not the way they were created. And when parents keep it a secret, or they tell their children but say, don't tell anyone, this is a secret, or it's nobody's business, that implies that there's something shameful about it. So parents can tell and talk about it right from day one. And I think this is another thing, going back to parents being adequately counseled and educated before they get pregnant, right? So that they understand these ideas and can talk through them and get to feel confident about them. Because what we want to do is instill that confidence in our kids so that when the time comes and we leave them at school and we're not there and they're out on the playground, that they can't be bullied about it. I knew that Ryan was so confident in his own story that nobody could ever bully him about it. No one would ever make fun of him or say the old, well, you have to have a dad. Everyone has a dad. Or, whatever kids say, oh, you're a test tube baby or whatever. When my son was very young, 4 or 5, if a kid would say that to him, out on the playground or something, he would just kind of roll his eyes and be like, okay, I guess I have to explain the sperm and the egg to you. And I think now, so my son is 34 now. I think there's a whole bunch of 34-year-olds who learned about the sperm and the egg from Ryan Kramer out on the playground when they were in kindergarten. Because the parents probably hadn't talked about these things, but Ryan Kramer did. And at that point, I was like, all I cared about was that he was confident enough in his own story and proud of his own story and the way he was created that nobody could ever make him feel ashamed or bad or embarrassed or different. He thought it was cool. Hey, if families are all different, and this is the way I was created, and it's a little bit different, and I think it's really cool. And so that's how parents, in addition to the disclosure and the telling and the talking about how you were created and really open and positive way, it's really important for your child, and I did this with Ryan too, it's really important for parents to model that conversation in front of the children so they learn how to talk about it. So Ryan watched me explain that he was a donor baby and, everything that I could explain about it to teachers and doctors and family and friends and acquaintances. And he saw me talk about it really confidently and openly and without a hint of shame or embarrassment or secrecy. And that way he learned, because kids, we model for our kids, not just the words we use, but the tone of our conversations and the emotion behind it. And so Ryan learned from me at a very early age that his story was one to be celebrated. And all donor families can do that, instill in their kids that their story isn't something to keep a secret or be ashamed of. It's something to celebrate and be proud of. And, when their kids learn their story really young, they're going to share it. So parents, you better tell everybody, because kids, don't keep secrets and they shouldn't be asked to do that. So I think parents who are feeling uncomfortable with the fact that they used a donor and maybe would lend themselves towards the privacy, secrecy, not telling, I ask them to reevaluate that for the benefit of their kid and consider honesty and openness from day one.
Yeah, that's amazing. On one end, you are empowering your child to be confident about how he came about. And on the other end, you are also contributing to, normalizing it and removing the stigma from these alternative methods of conceiving a child, which there shouldn't be a shame behind it at all. It's actually very normal to have to turn to donor conception in order to conceive a child, and the less shame that we attach to it, the better for several humans. So that's great. That's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing it. Now let's move on to the open mic section, and this is your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. So, well, if you want to keep talking about donor conception, that's completely fine with me. But the floor is yours. Take it away.
Well, I'm totally passionate about animals and my dog. And right outside my house, we have moose and bear, visiting all the time. And that's super cool. So that's my other passion. I know it's very, very cool. And foxes come and take eggs out of my hand every day, and very, very cool. Okay, but that's that. One thing I wanted to just cycle back to where we just were. And I think this might be interesting for people to learn this too. Excuse me. For the parents that use donor sperm, so back when I did it, it was probably 90% straight couples with male infertility. And over the years, that's really changed a lot. And now about a little bit more than 50% of the women buying sperm are single mothers by choice. So they're single mothers going it alone. So the disclosure issue is, a lot lessened because there is usually no visible dad around. About a third of the families are LGBTQ plus, right? So in those families too, in a lot of cases, there's not a man in the family. And so then disclosure, again, is going to happen earlier on. The disclosure is mostly relevant for the families that use egg donation, the heterosexual couples where there's a man and a woman and they use a donor egg. Those families, and then in infertility families where the man is infertile, like what I had, who use sperm, in those families, it can be very challenging because they're of the non-biological parent. And the non-biological parent can feel, like and actually it's true for LGBT families too, where there might be two moms or two dads, and one of them is not the biological parent. So what we see in all those families with a non-biological parent is that there is a greater tendency for the parents to not be as open with their children about the donor relatives, because one of the parents might feel insecure or fearful or threatened about the child's biological relatives, because that's a connection that they themselves don't have with their child. Yeah. So that's another thing that can be addressed, again, with the counseling and the education beforehand, focusing on the non-biological parent who may kind of put the kibosh on the connections because of their own fears and worries and insecurities. But I think it's a really important thing, because so many families who use donors have a non-biological parent in the family. So it's really, really important. It just lends itself to, I think, the number one thing that needs to happen is that, the donors and the parents need to be properly counseled and educated. And for the donors, they need to be properly educated about why donor-conceived people want to connect. Because a lot of them are fearful about connecting because these kids, maybe they want money, or they want me to pay for college, or they want to invade my family, or they want too much of my time. And a lot of them stand back and they don't come forward and make mutually desired contact because they're afraid of what it might mean for them and their families. And I think it's really important for donors to know that donor-conceived people are not looking for money, and they're not looking for your time, and they don't want to invade your family and disrupt the family balance you have, or be a negative contributor to your family in any way. Yeah. Most donor-conceived people that I know, and I know many, many thousands of them, they just want to know where they come from. And that was true for my son. The reason he reached out to his biological father is that two reasons. He wanted to know where he came from, who he came from, are they good people? What's my ancestry? What any medical things I should know about? But I think even more than that, and people don't realize this, the reason that donor-conceived people want to connect with their biological parents, the donors, is that they want to be acknowledged that they exist. I exist. I'm here. Like, they just want that other biological parent to know that there's someone that the donor can be proud of. And just an acknowledgement of their existence, really. Yeah. I'm here, I exist, and I want you to know about me. And I know for my son, the relationship that was created afterwards was kind of like the bonus, right? It was more important for him that his biological father knew that he existed and that he was somebody to be proud of. And when that happened, that was like, check. And I remember him telling me early on, like, look, if he doesn't want to meet me, I'll be fine. When I'm 18, because he was 15 at the time, he said, I'll hop on a plane. I'll go shake his hand. It wasn't like I have to know him and we have to be family to each other. The best thing that could happen for my son is that the donor, like we talked about earlier, was willing to redefine his idea of family to perhaps, maybe, we didn't know, maybe not, but perhaps include my son as a family member.
Yeah, that's great. And also the other thing with donors is that, they should kind of link that in donating their sperm or egg, that would probably result in creating a human. In there's sometimes, I guess, this voluntary disconnect in order to be able to separate themselves from what they have donated. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on there. That they create this disconnect between them and the resulting children, because, a lot of them are still lied to about how many there might be. So I think the idea of thinking that there could be dozens or hundreds is too overwhelming. Like, how would I possibly deal with that? Yeah. And then in their mind, they kind of put these donor kids as something other than the kids they're raising. Mm-hmm. But to those donor kids, that guy contributed the same DNA in both scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of jump out of your mind as a donor and think, how would this donor conceived people perceive me, right? And I think for everyone in the donor family, it's really about stepping out of your idea of what family is and consider one of the other stakeholders' ideas. For donors, the donor conceived people. For the donor conceived people, I think it's really important to understand where parents and donors are coming from. The more we understand about people, the more empathy we can have and understanding and compassion. It might not be the way that we think, but the more that you learn about how they feel, the easier it will be for you to maneuver with those people, through your journey of dealing with the parents and the donor and the other half siblings and the half siblings' parents. And, there's a lot of players in a donor family, like my son. Well, and here's what we do. So on the Donor Sibling Registry, it's not uncommon to have groups of more than 100 and even 200 half siblings. And we all, you get to your spreadsheet moment, which I found was like 6 or 7, where you can't keep them in your mind anymore. Mm-hmm. So we all have this spreadsheet next to our desks, just last month, 2 weeks ago, my son got a new half brother. And in March, he got another half sister. So it's not like you're never done, right? Yeah. It's not like, oh, good, now we're at 30, we're done. You're never done. Like, for the rest of their lives, my son and every other donor conceived person, every day there's possibility of another half sibling coming along. And that will be for the rest of their lives. And it's just, really amazing. And then those half siblings all come from families, and maybe they never told their kids. Almost half of my son's half siblings were never told the truth, and they learned through a DNA test. So you have families that are imploding, and anger issues, and betrayal and trust issues, and, really complications that were not necessary but are happening. So every donor family, you're dealing with a lot of people with a lot of sometimes unnecessarily complex situations, but nonetheless, you have to understand where the kid is coming from. If they only found out last week and they're shocked and upset and can't deal with it, or feeling overwhelmed. The last half brother that my son got, he was completely shocked and overwhelmed to find out that he had 30 half brothers and sisters, as you can understand.
Yeah,
but what those of us who are already in the groups try to make a soft landing pad for the new ones, right? Like, we try to just make it as easy as possible and be as empathetic and understanding and welcoming and friendly as possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Wendy, and for joining us today, spending your time with us. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do and learn more about donor conception, where can they go?
they go to donorsibling.registry.com. And if they have any questions at all, they email me, Wendy at donorsibling.registry.com. I'm always available. I'm uber responsive to emails. And check out our website. We have all our books are listed on there and our publications. So if you want to read about the data and what we've learned, that's the website is the place to do that too.
That's amazing. We'll also list Wendy's book in the show notes as well. Thank you everyone for tuning in to Altogether the Family Science Insights podcast, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Altogether, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.